Well, hi y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome to my shop and, okay, maybe not my shop, but I am a guy in the shop. I am not a professional woodworker. I am not a fine woodworker. I am not a historical woodworker. I'm a guy in my basement having fun. And I really want to make that distinction because the things that I talk about and show, I'm not going to be demonstrating the way to do it. I'm not going to be demonstrating the best way to do something. I'm going to be demonstrating the way that I have found that I enjoy to do things. And I like to make that distinction because one of the main things I like to focus on is that there is no right way to do things. There are 1,000 different ways to make things happen, and you're going to find teachers out there who teach their way of doing it. And a lot of people think that that's the way to do it. And I wanted to show that there are many other ways to do it. Yes?
I don't understand. What do you mean that there's no right way? Aren't you the right way?
Yes, okay, there is a right way to do it because my name is James Wright. Sorry about that, but yeah, that's
There is one right way. Your wife's way.
Yeah, there you go. Speaking of which, this is my wife's bench, and that's the reason it's all the way down here on the floor. So if I'm working down here, I'm sorry, but my wife is 4'10", and she made the bench that I decided this will be my travel bench because it is lightweight and small and compact, and I can throw it in the back of my car. It is a Moravian style with splayed legs, and it all comes apart in pieces, and the top is only about 100 pounds, so I can put it under an arm and carry it out the door. Yeah, it sounds like a lot, but I used to throw 2 packs of shingles on my shoulder and run up the ladder to throw them on the roof. And those are 90 pounds each. So this is a lot lighter.
You're younger than a lot of us. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I did that back when I was like at 16. I couldn't do that now. I've done a few other things since then. So tonight I want to talk about hand tools for the power tool woodworker. Most people think that there are 2 worlds. There's the power tool world and the hand tool world, but very, very few people are completely in one or the other. I'm one of the weirdos in that I'm all hand tools. And the reason I'm that is because I teach hand tools. If I start bringing power tools in my shop, then I'm not teaching the things that people are coming to my shop to see. So I do all hand tools because I teach all hand tools. I was actually raised all power tools. My father had a set of chisels hanging on the wall, and they were still in the plastic wrap. We had no way to sharpen them, but they were on the pegboard to prove that we did woodworking. But I never touched a hand plane until about 11 years ago when I transitioned over to hand tools. And it was kind of one of those things for me that was a bit of an eye-opener because I became a stay-at-home dad. Excuse me. And I needed a place in my basement, and I had a spot that was 8 foot by 8 foot. I had 3 kids under 3 years old, and I was a stay-at-home dad and needed something to keep my brain sane. And I found out that with hand tools, I could do them quietly. So when the kids were napping, I could do it in there. I could do them safely. If the kids wandered into the shop, there wasn't a problem with them if I was working with something because there wasn't a saw running away on it. It was quiet, there was dust, there was far less dust, so I could do it in my basement without tracking it throughout the house. Have you ever wondered why every tool makes sawdust? The router makes sawdust, the sanders make sawdust, all the saws make sawdust. Well, it used to be that the only tool that made sawdust was the saw. Everything else made chips and curls and large chunks of wood. Large chunks of wood don't get into your lungs, they don't travel around. Sometimes they'll get stuck to your sock. But I could do that in my basement without making a mess all throughout the house. And it was this aha moment that I could do woodworking again in the small space that I had. And at that point, I'd kind of gotten rid of all of my power tools and just consigned myself that I can't do anymore because my space is only 8 foot. But with the magic of hand tools, I could bring that back into my life. And the interesting thing was I had to relearn woodworking. I've been doing woodworking for 25 years, all power tools. And now I have to relearn everything. I knew how the joints go together. I know how things are supposed to work, but how do I turn this into woodworking? And that has been the joy I have. And so that is what my channel is all about, is teaching that joy of the curls of woodworking. So, all that being said, let me actually make sure I'm on path.
Are your kids all in school now?
Well, actually, they're homeschooled. So I'm the teacher. But yeah, actually, my daughter's 14, and she'll be graduating high school in 3 weeks. And she has a YouTube channel, so she's actually following my step and planning on becoming a full-time YouTuber as well. So she's got a YouTube channel, so if you want to watch a 14-year-old girl do woodworking, Melody's Workbench. The first thing we have to understand is the mindset difference between power tools and hand tools. In power tools, you have to make a jig that holds everything in place. And once the jig is set up and running the way you want it to, then you run things through it. Now, there are a lot of differences that when you're turning on a lathe, you are the jig, you're running the tool. But if you're talking a table saw, a router, things like that, you generally have to have something that constrains the wood. And the skill is in setting up that, is setting the fences, setting the stops, setting everything that needs to run up. Once you have the table saw set up, most any monkey can grab the boards and run them through. But if I take a handsaw and I make the marks on the board and I say, here, it's all set up, go do it, that's a very different skill set. When it comes to hand tools, the skill is in the actual use of it. And that's a bit of a mindset change for a lot of people, because you're not teaching the basics of numbers, of where do the fence need to be and how do you set up the fence. You're teaching your muscles to do something they haven't done before. And that turns a lot of people off, because with power tools, a lot of things you can learn by hearing about them. You can read it in a magazine and you can go out and duplicate it, as long as you have the right tools and you spend enough money to make it happen. Whereas with a hand tool, I can teach you every trick I know. I can stand there with you and tell you the things your arm is doing that shouldn't happen. But until you actually get that skill in, it's one of those things you can only learn by messing up. And you can't learn it by reading it. And that's a little bit of a mindset change. So you have to understand, once you pick up hand tools, you're not going to get the results you expect. The only way you're going to get those results is by doing it over and over and over and learning the skill required to run the hand tool. Because there is no jig involved. It's a line on a board and I cut to it. So once you get past that idea of, I'm going to have to mess up on this, and that's okay. The second mindset change is with power tools, you expect perfection. Now, you're not always going to make it, and you're going to be a little off the line one way or the other, but your line's probably going to be nice and straight if your tool's set up well. Whereas with a hand tool, you have to expect imperfection. It doesn't matter how accurate your saw is, it doesn't matter how good your skill is, it will never be perfect. You'll never get that dead straight line. You'll never get something you are completely happy with. It's one of those things that it doesn't matter how long you've been working with the hand tools, you will not be happy with the result. Because perfection is not a location, perfection is a direction. I can head towards that all I want for the rest of my life, and I will never get to perfection. Whereas with power tools, it's kind of like, if it's a 1/4 inch, measure a 1/4 inch with calipers, then it's a 1/4 inch. Whereas with hand tools, maybe a 1/4 inch here, but it's not here, and then it's back there, and it's over here. So there's a reality to this as opposed to a precision. That's a little bit hard for some people to get. But once you understand those two things, you can understand what you can expect with hand tools. You're not going to get perfection, and you're not going to get things running the way you want them to, but you're going to get things that can get you a little bit closer. And it is you actually doing the work. Make sure I'm still online. There we go. One of the things in my audience is that around 60 to 70% of my audience are programmers. They are people who work in the computer all day long, and they come home and they want to have something physical that they've made. And they don't want anything between them and the work. And that's where hand tools really shine, because you are the one making the change. You are the one putting the power into it and pushing it. And there's something really appealing about that. And the big change there is that you're focusing on the work itself rather than the project coming up. And if you can take that separation and think about, I'm working on this step at this moment and making this particular wood curl, it becomes far more enjoyable. Whereas if you're looking at, I need to build this bench, I got all these steps to do, and I want to get this done, hand tools won't get you this bench. Hand tools will get you every little cut, every little joint, and you can think about each step along the way. Whereas power tools are more about the production, getting things done more efficiently, quicker, and you can get to the project quicker with power tools. Whereas hand tools are more about each individual step and the enjoyment along the way. Does that all make sense? I like to bring that in so that you kind of understand when I talk about, I'll say, now the hand tool mindset will look at it this way, the power tool mindset will look at it this way. I'm not really making one bad or one good. It's that they have two different things that they're focusing on. And once you understand that, then you can see when does one apply and when does the other apply. Because 99% of people out there are not all power tools or all hand tools. Everyone's in that gray area in between. Everyone's a hybrid woodworker. We'll pull a hand tool out for this or that, and some people do a lot of hand tools and they just use the thickness planer to bring things into shape. And some people do a lot of power tools, but they just bring out the chisel for that last little bit on there. There's a big gray area, and you have to figure out what do you want to be. And some people, the project will determine how much hand tools you want to bring in. Are you going to be making 7 of these? Well, you don't want to cut 7 of these with hand tools, whereas you can run them all through the planer. But if you're doing something in the basement, you just want to enjoy the time and break away, hand tools might be the choice for that. So let's look at some of the options. Number one, we're going to start looking at the basic chisel. This is what every tool in the shop is. Every tool is just a jig to hold a chisel. A knife is just a fat chisel. A handsaw is just a whole bunch of chisels in a row. A circular saw is just a circular blade with a whole bunch of chisels running around the outside. A router is just a bunch of chisels set around in a circle that way. Everything is a jig to hold a chisel. And this is when someone says, well, yeah, what about a mallet? Okay, a mallet's not a jig to hold a chisel. You got me there. But once you start to realize what a chisel can do, you can see where it can work. So the cool thing about hand tools that power tools can't do is power tools cannot make a 3-dimensional corner. So if you have top, side, bottom, a power tool can't make a tight corner. Now you can get kind of close to that. You can get an oscillating tool that will get you in close. You could get a plunge, a hollow auger, not hollow auger, what's I'm looking for? A hollow mortiser, hollow chisel mortiser. That'll get down there, but it leaves the bottom kind of rough. And there's lots of little things that'll get you close, but most of them are going to leave one side rough, or they're going to go farther on one side or not. Whereas with a chisel, I forgot to set this up there. With a chisel, I can quickly and easily finish out corners. And one of the big debates is if I'm going to make a mortise and tenon, and I cut my tenon with a router, and I cut my slot with a router, well then they all have rounded corners. And they're great, they fit together. But if I cut my tenon with a saw, I've got square corners, and I cut my mortise with a router, I got rounded corners. Well, how do I fix that? And the chisel is the great answer to this, because, where'd my mallet go? There we are. I can come in and make 3 corners, and then, I made that a little bit too wide. My eyeball's not as accurate as I want it to be. I should go back into the optometrist and tell him to fix me. So I can come in and very quickly make a spot in here that now has a tight corner inside. And chisels are great for squaring things out. If you've got those interesting points where things are rounded and you want to turn them square, chisel. If you've got the corner on a board and you want to round it over, chisel. And if you ever watched Paul Sellers on YouTube, he has an amazing video, and it's one of my favorites. I need a faster vise. I can bring this on here, and I'll put my chisel down parallel with the board, round that over, bring it back a little bit, and every time I'm just going to go a little farther and a little bit farther, and I'm just eyeballing this until I get close to the line, and I've rounded that out. Hit it with a bit of sandpaper, a rasp, a file, and I've got a nice clean corner really quickly with a chisel.
Block plane for that?
What's that?
Would a block plane be, I like to use a block plane.
It could, but for a big corner like this where I'm doing like a 3/4 inch round over, it would take a while to go through that. I'll be hitting a block plane a little bit later. And in this case, how long would it take you to do that with a power tool? Now I could take it over to the sander, but it would probably take me a good bit longer than that just did. I could get a jigsaw, but then I have to go get the jigsaw set up and pull out the cord and plug it in. And whereas with the chisel, that's great. The downside to this is that's one corner. Now, if I needed to do 4 corners around the table, well, the chisel's going to be a little slower, because if I can set up the jigsaw faster, well, once the jigsaw is set up, well, then the rest of them just go zinc, 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 zinc. And that's one of the big downsides to hand tools. If I'm doing one item, the hand tool can often be faster. But if I'm doing 4 of them, it might be worth time on the setup. Because with power tools, it's all about the setup. With hand tools, it's all about the skill involved.
And sharpness.
Yes, we'll be touching sharpness a little bit later. 3-dimensional corner, bevel up versus bevel down. One of the other differences when it comes to hand tools is the difference between bevel down and bevel up. So a chisel has a flat surface and a beveled surface. And I'm not sure why it is, but if you came from a power tool background like I did, you may have first come across a hand plane, and the very first time you put the iron in, you put it in upside down with the bevel on the top. And there's just something about that when you come from a power tool mindset, is that the bevel should be up, because if I'm pushing the chisel this way, it's going to move in the direction of the flat surface. But a hand tool user will most often grab the chisel, and the very first thing they're going to do is use it beveled down. And I would love to really dig into this a little bit more, but it's one of those interesting things, because almost every plane out there has the bevel down on it. And the nice thing about that is the cutting angle is just determined by the bed, rather than if the bevel is up, like on a lot of block planes, then you have the bed angle plus the bevel angle. That gives you your cutting angle. But the big difference between bevel up versus bevel down is the control you can get. So let me move this in here. So if I want to cut a notch into this board, if I come in with the bevel, let's see if I can turn that. Yeah, you can see it here with the bevel up like this. And I cut into the board this way. Well, now I have a problem, because if I want it to come back out and curve out the other side, now I can't do that because the bevel is aiming down. So I can make this chisel go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into the wood, but I can't bring it back up. Whereas if I turn it around this way, and I'll cut in this way, now I can ride that bevel and I can come back up. Come from the other side, and I can let that cut ride up. With the bevel down, I have more control. I can actually cause the chisel to go deeper, or I can cause the chisel to go more and more shallow. I can just change the angle of the chisel and determine where is it riding through that wood. So if I've got a line drawn on the side and I want to follow along with that, put the chisel bevel down and run through it. The downside to that is that my direction of force in the chisel is this way, but my bevel cutting is that way. So if I'm running flat here, so my bevel is here, my bevel is flat, and I want to run along the board this way, I'm putting my force this way, and the chisel is going that direction, and so it's just always, you're fighting it a little bit. It takes the skill to run on that bevel. And once you have the skill, great, not a problem. But a lot of times you're thinking, oh, I want to push it, and now if I'm going this way with the bevel up, now when my force is going in that direction, I'm going to be putting all my force directly in line with where I'm cutting. And I think that's where the difference comes with the mindset of bevel up versus bevel down. Because if the bevel is up, now I'm forcing the chisel in the same direction as I'm cutting. But I have less control because I can only go in one direction. Whereas if the bevel is down, now I have less force going in the direction I'm cutting, but I've got all the control. And that's where the skill difference comes in. And I don't know why. I find that fact to be just absolutely fascinating to me. And you can tell by someone's background by the way they pick up a chisel and start going to town on it, just by the way you initially cut it. Now, there are definitely times when you want to use that reference surface. If I'm referencing off, so if I've got a tin in here, set this down, let the camera come on. So if I set the tin on here and I want to chisel back, I can use the flat of the chisel to reference on this surface to get a nice flat cut back there. If I come in bevel, Well, I'm not going to be able to reference and get anything flat because I'm going to be going up and down as this turns and moves. And so there are times when you want that flat reference, and there are times when you want that control. And having a bevel on there gives you that choice of which one do you want at which time. Make sure I'm on line. Bevel up versus bevel down. Yeah. 44, right on time. Nice, happy. Next thing up, we have the marking. Oh, I didn't bring a pencil. Yeah. Imagine I have a pencil. Oops, sorry, I got a question back here. Oh. Another big difference you're going to see between the power tool mindset and, oh, thank you, is pencils. Oh, even better, a carpenter's pencil. You'll make this image precisely. Whenever you're working with power tools, you generally mark out your work with a pencil. Whenever you're working with hand tools, you generally mark out your work with a knife. And the reason is, if I draw a line on a board, and I want to cut it there, I'm going to take my saw over and get it close to that line. But if I'm off one way or the other, it just depends on my saw setup. It doesn't actually depend on where that line is. It's just how closely can I see that line and how closely can I line up my saw with that line. Whereas with a hand tool, because the saw is in my hand, I have a lot more finite control about where I'm moving on the board and where things are going back and forth. And in that case, if I use a knife, where'd my square go? Where did my square go? Ah, there it is. If I use a knife, and I set my square on there, I can cut right along that. And the nice thing about the knife cut is it's an infinitely small line. And that triggers a few people because there is no such thing as infinitely small. It really is an infinitely small line because you are making a cut in the wood. You are severing the fibers. All the fibers on one side disappear. All the fibers on the other side disappear. And even if I cut that off of my line, I can always come back with a plane and just go until those fibers just disappear and I can get really, really close to it. And a knife gives you an infinitely accurate line you can cut to. But if I'm marking with a knife on power tools, it really doesn't matter as much because the power tool will set up wherever the power tool fence is set up, not where the line is set up. And so pencils make far more sense for power tools. The downside to the knife is it's kind of hard to see. Let me see if you can focus in on this. There are two lines here. I don't know if the camera will even pick it up. Oh, it does pick it up. Well, that's a nice camera. So I've got my marking knife here and my pencil line. The pencil's far easier to see. And especially as I turned 40 a couple years ago, and now all my knife lines just suddenly disappeared overnight. And they keep getting harder and harder to find. So a lot of people will come back through a pencil and darken out the marking knife line. But a marking knife, anytime you are working with hand tools, makes far more sense because you can move up onto it. You are making a line that is just infinitely small. The other nice thing about a marking knife is if I want to cut this board, I want to cut this board to be the same length as this board, what I can do is I can come into that pencil and I can mark off how long that is. But now I've got a mark that's the thickness of my pencil lead. Am I cutting on one side? Am I cutting the other? Am I splitting the hairs? And you can look at this and realize, yes, in this case, because I put this on here, I want that pencil to completely disappear. But then I take it over to the saw and it's like, wait, do I want it to disappear that way or do I want it to disappear this way? Whereas a knife, because it's actually severing the fibers, it becomes very, very clear that this is what I'm getting rid of and this is what I'm keeping. And so in this case, what I can do is I can line these up with my finger on this side. And as I was talking before, we have the flat and the bevel on the knife. I can put my flat against this, reference the work, and put my knife mark on there. And now when I cut that and clean it up, I know those two boards are going to be dead accurate because I have already started the cut. It's the very first cut of the saw with the knife. And yeah, it's one of those things where there are times where we as woodworkers get very precise about things. And we start measuring to the 10,000ths of an inch. and we get really, really accurate, and we make our cuts exactly where we want, and we sneak right up on it, and then we put it down the table. We come back down the next day, and wood has moved, and now we're a 1/16 inch bigger than we were a couple days ago. And you have to know where do you need that precision, and where do you really doesn't care. Generally, I make all my marks with a knife because I have it there and I've been doing hand tools. And most of the time, it really doesn't care. It really doesn't matter because I don't need to be that precise. But there are times when, I'm feeling kind of artsy-fartsy. And I want to make things perfect. And I really want to pour my heart and soul into this. And that's when the enjoyment of making a really accurate cut just kind of speaks to my soul. Does it really matter? Probably not. But I don't know, I kind of like that. And that's one of the things I like is just the things that really don't matter except to me. Like the first time you pick up where'd my Lee Nielsen? There, Lee Nielsen. Oh, yes, you can pet it and it just feels good. Yes, happy things. Let's go into this. Stop, cut out, marking knife. Not as easy as you see. Cool. So let's actually start looking at some of the applications for where, sorry.
Before you leave pencil versus knife, I thought you would get to this, but you hadn't mentioned it. It's particularly important in my mind when you use a chisel.
Yes.
Because the chisel fits in the knife cut. It doesn't fit in the pencil cut.
Well,
It really gives you
one of the cool things along that line is when I make a cut so if I'm going to take this knife and I want to make a cut in the surface here, I'm not making a V cut in here like that. I'm actually making a straight line down and a chip out at an angle. And that chip out at the angle, I'm keeping all of this and I'm getting rid of all of that. So now I have this chip in here. So when my chisel needs to come in, my chisel already has that bevel angle and fits into that bevel angle, and I already have something set to register my chisel into. So if here, I've got this knife line here. I can slide my chisel along this, and it won't stop at the pencil line, but it will just naturally catch into that knife line. It holds right in there. It's the same thing with the saw. I can actually put the saw on here, and I will lay the teeth on an angle here, and they actually fit right into that slot and register in place. I can make that a little bigger by coming into the knife at an angle, and creating what we now call as a knife wall. Thank you, Paul Sellers. You'll often hear this referred to as a first-class cut, because now that I've got that bit of notch in there, this actually holds the saw really nicely in place so that my saw is locked in place as I make my first cut. And that knife wall in there is the first-class cut. The second-class cut is I drew a line with a pencil or a knife, and I'm just going to cut straight to it. Then the third-class cut is, that looks long enough. Roy Underhill has a really good video on first, second, third-class cuts. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I should add that in my notes for the next time. Where are we at? Router plane. This is one of my favorites. There are a couple places where hand tools really, really, really shine, especially in the power tool world. And particularly, power tools are phenomenal at producing large amounts of material. You can thickness plane things really quickly. You can rip them to length. If you're doing multiples of them, you can run them all through. But when it comes to sneaking up on things, hand tools give you that ability to just kind of dial things in really, really closely. Where's that depth on? There we are. So here, I cut this dado. You can see this down here. I cut this dado on the table saw. Yes, I own a table saw. No, it does not have a fence. I need to fix that someday, but I only use it like once a year. And it was this morning cutting this dado out for the demonstration. And if you have a dado stack, you'll know that it just never leaves it perfectly clean. There are some that are really good and gets it very, very close. If you ever used a wobble blade, I'm glad you still have all 5 fingers. But does the bottom of this need to be perfectly clean? Most of the time, no. But my soul says this needs to be perfect. because I'm a fine woodworker, right? And therefore everything has to be really nice and clean. So what I can do is I can come in with the router plane and make it really nice and clean. Now I could come in with a chisel. Let me grab my 1/2 inch. I could come in with a chisel and I can try and scratch that out. But again, I might be diving in or pulling up and going back and forth. With the router plane, I can set it up to the depth, lock this down, and I can just clean out the bottom. And this is what I find fun. Very, very appealing, very, very enjoyable, and getting a really nice, clean bottom on here. So, to the camera, you can see this is routed out nice and smooth and clean, and then this section down here is where I didn't go out. Now you notice I didn't plane all the way out the other side, because if I do that, I'm going to break out the fibers on this edge here. So I come for a certain direction, then I stop, turn around and cut from the other side to save those fibers. But with a router plane, I can set it up to the depth of what I'm going to be doing, and I'll take the table saw just a little ways away from that, and I'll bring this in for the last pass or two. And because this is set up to have the same distance out from this body, I know that all of my dados I'm going to cut are the exact same. Not to mention, this is way more fun than a dado stack. Yeah, that's a lot of enjoyment. But even if I've got something like this, oops, sorry, oh, ha, catch up, ha, no, see up here? In this case, I just cut out either side on this. And this is what I usually like to do if I'm using a table saw. Rather than bring out a dado stack, I just cut either side. And the reason being is now I get the enjoyment of using the chisel and the router. As I can come in with this, bevel up, I'm going to come down really close to it, and very quickly come that way. Because I can't get the chisel in here, I'll just come in, bevel down, and knock that out. Now I can bring in the router plane and cut that out. Now, I've left a little bit in here, probably about a 1/16 of an inch. Pull this out so you can see. Oop. About a 1/16 inch away from the line there. Actually, a little bit more on that side. And if I came in with a router, that'd be a little bit too heavy of a cut to make. So Stanley made these routers with this wheel. See when we do that? This wheel has some slop in it, and it rolls back and forth. And a lot of people really hate that. I hate slop in the tools, where there's just, it has that bit of movement. And the interesting thing is, Stanley actually made this as a feature. They used to advertise that we have this wheel that has that movement in there. Why in the world would you advertise that your tools have slop in it? And the interesting thing is, it moves in this groove on the cutter. Here, I'll bring it back down. It moves in the groove on the cutter by the thickness of a single shaving. And so, let me make sure I got this right. I've got this up at the top here. What I can do is, before loosening this, I'm going to run that down until it hits the bottom of the groove. Now I loosen this, and the iron drops the thickness of one shaving. Tighten it up, and just made that one movement. So let me set this up and show you how fast that goes. I'm going to move this up to here. So I've got this taking a rough shaving off of that. I want to drop it down a little bit more. All I do is I move this wheel down, the movement of the slop, loosen this up, the iron drops, tighten it up, and now I went down the thickness of one shaving. And now I want to move it down one more, loosen it, let it drop, tighten it back up, and then we can go back through again. And so this gives you a very accurate movement from one to the other. And the sad part is, if you go buy a new high-end, really expensive router plane, they removed that slop because you can't buy an expensive router plane with slop in it, and no one knows that that was actually a feature. And I think it was the 1910 or 1909. Yeah, 1909, 1910, something like that. The catalog actually showed the diagram about, hey, it moves by the thickness of one shaving. And most people don't know that now. But that allows you to sneak up on the cut 1/100th of an inch by 1/100th of an inch. And so if you want to sneak up on it by 5/1000th of an inch, you just move it half the thickness of that slop. And you take another shaving. And it's a really interesting feature that allows you to just get really, really close to it. So with your table saw, you can take out the majority of the work, get things really close, and then you can come with this and have a lot of fun and watch those little curls come off. And I find that to be just happy. The other one, tenons. Have you ever made your mortise and your tenon, and then you come back and it just doesn't fit? And it's to that point where, you know, if I brought out a mallet, I could probably hit it and give like a 50-50 chance the mortise is going to go pop. Whereas with a router plane, now I can get it really close, and I can come in with the router plane, and I'm going to have to change the height on this again. And I can move it up to right there. And I can register the plane by putting weight on this side, and I can swing it in. I'm not getting anything there. So let's come down one, tighten it back up. Did I go the wrong direction? I went the wrong direction. So now I can come in, and as long as I reference this surface, I can take off 1/100th of an inch at a time and sneak up on it. Again, coming from both sides. You know, if I was thinking, I would have made a mortise for this that wasn't quite right. That would have been a fun demonstration. But I think you kind of get the idea. I took off 1/100th of an inch all the way across that by referencing this surface here, because I want my tenon to be parallel to this surface. And so this allows me to actually come in and really get up close on it. Now the problem is, especially for people new getting into it, 10 years or so ago, you could go out and buy a Stanley 71 router plane with 1 or 2 cutters. It would cost you about 25 bucks because they're antiques, and there are thousands and thousands, if not millions of these out there. Really, really common tool. But in the last 20 years or so, there has been a really large insurgence in people getting back into hand tools, and these have gotten very expensive. When I bought this one actually, I still have the box, I have the tags, I have all the wrapping from it, and I paid 50 bucks for original in the box with all the tags, and yes, it's the one I use. Now, they're probably going to be 150 to 200 bucks for what I had there. And so they've gotten very, very expensive. Thankfully, they are dirt easy to make. I've got this one, which is actually a kit from Paul Sellers. Really kind of interesting design to it. Sorry.
That's all right.
This one actually has a straight iron that goes through the body. So rather than having, where's that foot? There's the foot. Rather than having a cutting iron that has an angle on it, here, put that in there to get some contrast. This one actually has, open it up, a straight iron, a little more. There it goes. A straight iron on there. And a lot of people love this straight iron because it's easier to sharpen because you sharpen it like a chisel. Personally, I hate these straight irons because as you move it deeper into the body, the cutting edge goes farther and farther forward, and if it goes down a 1/2 inch, now my cutting edge is in front of the circle. So I'd have to make my circle bigger in order to see it at the deeper depth, and then my circle gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Whereas with this, as it goes deeper and deeper, it's still in the same spot of that circle as it goes up and down. The problem is, how do you sharpen that? And, I didn't bring my, let's see if I can do this. I'm going to use, nope, not going to work that. I don't have anything up here, do I? Here, I can use the back of my knife. So, I normally grab a screwdriver and I pop these out. These are my sharpening plates. They're diamond stones. And I can set this on here, hang it over the edge, and just take the chisel, set it on here, and I can sharpen my edge like that, just hanging over the side. And so I sharpen it just like a really short chisel. It doesn't take anything more. But this, you can put in a sharpening jig if you're going to use it. So it kind of depends on you. If you're reliant on a sharpening jig, this is definitely easier. But if you gotten to the point where you do things freehand, I don't know. I kind of find that easier. So that's one of the big differences between a lot of them having the straight or the angled iron is sharpenability. But this is more functional in that you can see it more. It usually has a better viewing angle for it. But a lot of people like that. I've actually, where is it? This is the one that I make. And this is actually just made with simple hardware. So in here, I've got, let me pull out the cutting iron itself. Oop, those came off. I should just take those right off. So I've got a foot style cutting iron. This one actually comes from Rockler. You can buy it for like 16 bucks, I think it is. And then inside here, you can see there's a U-bolt that goes through, and that just pulls it back against the body. I put in a, what is that, hanging bolt that has wood screws on one end and machine threads on the other, and then put in this thumb screw on there. So it's all hardware parts other than the cutting iron, and you can make a fully functional straight iron cutter. I do know a lot of people who use these, and they'll get an Allen wrench and just cut a bevel onto an Allen wrench and stick it in there. So they don't have to be complicated. They can be really, really simple. But a router plane is usually the first tool I tell people, you know, if you're getting into hand tools and you want to bring some more hand tools into your woodworking world, a router plane is the bomb, because you can do your tenons, you can do your dados, you can adjust almost all of your joints, have one parallel surface that's higher than another parallel surface, and that's what router planes do, is they make a second surface parallel to the first surface. And that's a lot of joinery. And router planes allow you to sneak up onto it and have that little bit of enjoyment. Now, they are going to be a little slower, and if you're doing a whole bunch of things, it's probably better to set up your table saw to get it exactly where you want, so you can run 18 boards through and get them all exactly the right size. But if you're doing one or two and making a small box with 4 corners, a router plane may be the way to go, because it's probably going to be faster than really dialing in the table saw, whereas the table saw, you just have to get it close to the router plane, you can come in and clean it up. 6:15, good. Router plane. Grooving plane. Okay, this is what got me into hand tools. This plane right here, this is a grooving plane that I made out of some firewood. I literally went out into the firewood pile behind my house. I found a block of white oak, and I got an old chisel that I had from Harbor Freight, and I whipped this out in about 2 hours or so. It is a really, really dead easy tool to make. Looks really complicated, and this is one of my favorite classes to teach, because a lot of people look at that and think, wow, that's complicated, there's a lot going on there. Honestly, I teach a 3-hour class where people who have never made anything before with hand tools will turn out a completely functional hand plane in 3 hours. And I have not yet had someone who hasn't finished the class without a functioning tool. It's really, really simple and really, really easy. But here, I'll show you. If I've got a board, yeah, that'll do. And I want to put a groove in the board. The most common groove, generally the most common groove you're going to come is 1/4 by 1/4 by 1/4. It's a groove that is a 1/4 inch in from the outside, it's a 1/4 inch wide, and it's a 1/4 inch deep. And with this, it's just permanently set up to a 1/4 inch in from the outside, a 1/4 inch wide, and has a stop in there at a 1/4 inch deep. And let's see if I'm going with the grain. There, 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch groove. No router need to be set up, no fence on the router table, no dialing it in and out and trying to match things up with thickness blocks. It just cuts. And let me tell you, these are fun. I have literally spent hours in the shop not making anything, just making curls. And this got me into hand tools, because oh yes, so much. And yeah, you wonder where my hair went. I'll often wear them afterwards. But yeah, it's a really simple tool. And a lot of times if you need to make that groove, you're making a box. It's got 4 sides, 4 pieces, and you can whip out 4 of those grooves way faster than you could ever think about even pulling the router out of the cabinet. And this is one of those spots where they really, really shine. Now, if I need to make a whole dresser worth of grooves, I'll set up the router table. It's going to be faster than doing this. But if I need to make 1 or 2, or I just want to fiddle around in the shop, this is fun. And I've now made probably 30, 40, maybe 50 of these by now, because I keep making them for classes. And this is my favorite intro class, because anyone out there can make one of these. It's just a block of maple, wedge is made out of maple, and then this one I actually make with an 01 piece of tool steel that I got on Amazon. It comes annealed, and I cut a bevel on one end. It's 1/4 inch by 1/8 inch thick. You just shape a bevel on a grinder, and then you heat it up to cherry red or until the magnet falls off. Dunk it in some oil, or dunk it in some oil, and then you want to put it in the oven for a couple hours and bring its temperature from 400 down slowly. And you get a really nice clean cutting edge and a really simple tool. And this is one of those things where, you know, if you're making things in the shop, a lot of times you're making the project and you want to get the project done, but then you can bring in small tools like this that just make the individual little steps enjoyable. So yeah, I just ran 3 hours with this tool buzzing in the background and really annoying me and getting in my ears. I want to stop for a second and take a breath. I'll grab a grooving plane and just make some curls. And sometimes it's for the project, and sometimes it's just for my own sanity. But yeah, grooving plane, it's my favorite.
Does that work on the ends too?
Yeah. Now, when I go on the end, it needs to be really sharp. I don't know if this one is really sharp. I think this one might be sharp enough. That's too heavy. You should be good. So when I go on the end here, the problem with it, no, I picked the end with a knot. Let's not do that. It would work with a knot, but not so much. When I go on the end, here, I gotta put these in. My vise is racking, so it's not pinching quite well. And so this is a little anti-rack device. That allows me to put even pressure. Did I get the right end? Yeah, I got the right end. So it's probably taking too heavy of a shaving. Lock it down! Okay, we're back to where we were. There you go. So the problem with the end grain is I'm blowing out the fibers over here. And so the way you fix that is you grab another board and you set it up on the end to stop those fibers from snapping. But yeah, does the end grain.
Now, can you do that in white oak?
Here you go. It's gonna be a little slower. Here, we gotta get that down on there. Die, you stupid thing! Here we go. Okay, here we go. Yeah, you can get a split off on the end there. Yeah, I did not sharpen this one beforehand, but better to sharpen it, set up a little bit lighter, go a little bit easier. And especially if I have a heavier bench. There you go. That's that end. Didn't get all the way down on this end. But yeah, white oak. Just take a little bit more time to set it up a little bit finer. Yeah, so yeah, if you want to do anything end grain wise, you ever seen old molding planes where they got those interesting shapes? like the Roman ogis and things like that. It'll do the same thing. You can do that in end grain, sine grain. It just takes more time. On end grain, you want to make a thinner shaving, and you want to make sure it's really nice and sharp. As with everything with hand tools, sharpness is important. With power tools, when it gets dull, it'll still do the work. It just won't do it quite as nicely, or it might burn the surface, but you can still cut it. With hand tools, when it gets dull, it stops working. And it gets really annoying because you have to have it sharp. And I get emails all the time where I'm having a problem with this tool. What's going on here? You need to sharpen it. 90% of the time, if you're having a problem with it, it needs to be sharpened. And that's the downside to hand tools is you do spend a good bit of time sharpening it. And that's where it's nice to have a good sharpening system that you can do things quickly with. And specifically, I talked earlier about the difference between using a jig and hand sharpening. Now you got me out of breath. Hand tools are not a great workout, but they make you think it is, so it counts, right? The difference between using a jig to sharpen is a freehand to sharpen. The nice thing about freehand sharpening is I can pick it up. Well, here, let's do this. I haven't opened this one up in a while. There it goes. If that iron needs to be sharpened, I can come over here, move that back onto this one, slide all the tools, knock them off on the floor, oop, like that, and use a little bit of window cleaner. And to sharpen it freehand, it's as simple as to have a burr, a little more. That's what I'm looking for. And then polish it down. And flip that burr off until it just falls off. And there we go. That is exactly what I'm looking for. Really nice and sharp. That's what I'm looking for. And it's just that fast. If it's hand tools, it's 30 seconds or less for an average chisel or bench plane. Now, if I have to set up a jig, I've tripled the amount of time. And it's the exact same thing as power tools because you're setting up a jig so that people can do it easily. The downside is to doing it by hand is it requires the skill. And the only way you're going to get the skill is by messing up 100 times. And so you've got to be ready to learn the skill. You've got to do it over and over again. You've got to practice it, and you're going to be messing up, and things aren't going to go great. And then one day you'll sharpen it and be like, oh, wow, that's what sharp feels like. And then the next time you sharpen it, it's like, oh, no, this is what sharp feels like. And you have that whole progression as you're learning to sharpen that every time you take it back, the next time it actually gets sharper than it's ever been before, and you start realizing what real sharp feels like. And that's just one of those fun things.
You have about 10 minutes.
I am almost done here. Grooving plane, block plane. Now, for the actual hand tool person, block planes are not used that often. It's one of those things I will pull out if I want to put a chamfer on a board. Oop, forgot to do that. And it allows me to very quickly, as long as it's set up, run the chamfer down the corner of a board. And I get a really nice clean chamfer on there. Very, very pleasing, very, very fast, incredibly enjoyable. But in general, for a hand tool guy, that's about all I use the block plane for. Now for power tools though, you use the block plane all the time. You can use it for the final little cleanup on the end grain. You can use it for that chamfer. You can use it for easing the corner. There are lots of points where you just need a block plane. And the great thing about it is you can especially get little block planes that you can put in your apron and you can carry around with you. And at a moment's notice, you can pick it out and chamfer that edge down. Break an edge on a really sharp board that's about to give you a splinter. A block plane fixes that. For hand tools though, in general, the hand tools are all stored on the wall behind me or underneath the bench or on a box at the end of the bench. And I don't carry the tools on me for an apron because it's rare that I'm walking more than this. In a power tool shop, you're walking from the table saw to the thickness planer, to the router table, to the bandsaw, and you're walking around the shop moving from tool to tool, and it's nice to have things on you so you can access them quickly. Little block planes are phenomenal for that. Whereas for the hand tool woodworker, I've got this just as close and it works faster and easier, and I don't need another tool. So I'm usually going to be pulling out my number 4 to do that. But for power tools, block planes are used all the time. Yeah, that's one of the other fun things between power tools and hand tools. Hand tools, your shop only needs to be as big as the item you're going to build, because the hand tools move around the thing you're working on. Whereas with power tools, the tools stay put and the work moves through them. So you need to have in-feed, you need to have out-feed, and you need to have space for in-feed and out-feed for all of your tools. So for power tools, the shop becomes much bigger. Whereas hand tools, my original shop was 8 foot by 8 foot, and I made an 8 foot dining room table. Because it worked. Then my wife wanted a 12 foot dining room table, which was reason I told her I need a bigger shop. And so I got a bigger shop so I can make the dining room table.
A bigger house would be a bigger shop.
Well, yeah, that was the next step, yes. Files and rasps. This is one of the last things I want to talk about is files and rasps are something that the hand tool user uses a lot, but for some reason they don't work as well into the power tool world. You don't see them as much. But there are a lot of ways that you can add a hand tool touch to a power tool project with a file and rasp, especially if you have any organic shape. Yeah, I said that right. I think I was wanting to say origami. Here, this and this. So these two saws, I'll let you zoom in on that. These two saws are exactly the same thing, just a slightly different plate length. And this one on the bottom looks a lot nicer. If you can see the there we go. Hey, I can do that. Whereas the one on the top doesn't look quite as nice, because this one on the top, a router went around and cut that shape and cut this shape, and you have the exact same rounded surface here as you have here, as you have here, and everything on this just screams, a machine pumped this out. Whereas this is the exact same handle, but, where am I at there? This, I came in with a file and rasp, and I eased that over to give a nice smoother transition, and my radius here is different from a radius here. And then I came in and I carved in the bottom here, and I added some extra little details and did some carving down this. And just when, this probably took me 30, 40 minutes with a file and rasp. And I shaped something that says this was handmade. This was made to fit my hand, my specific use, and has a nice tight fit on there. This just looks nicer than something that came out of a machine. And the only difference between these two was a file and rasp. And I come in with the rasp to do the quick shaping. And then I'll come in with the file. Oh, that's right, I left that one here. Then I'll come in with the file side, and I can use that to give my final little detail. And I will finish right off of the file. Just metalworking files give you an incredibly butter smooth surface. No sanding required, no pores getting clogged, and you get a really nice clean surface right off of the file. And especially, this is a 4 in hand, so it's got a rasp and a file on a rounded surface. On the other side, it's got a rasp and a file on a flat surface. And if you're just getting started, you can do a ton of work with one of these little 4 in hands. And it allows you to add that little bit of detail, that little bit of shape, anything that goes in your hand, and you can make it look handmade just by adding a little bit more to it. And I don't know why rasps and files don't work their way into the power tool shop as much. But they're something that I find myself using all the time just to add that detail. Especially any hand tool, anything you're holding on to, like the grooving plane here. Like my thumb comes over. I want this to be rounded, and I just keep using the rasp and file until it feels good. And that's where I want it to be. Is there any particular design? Did I draw on anything on this? No, I just hit it until it feels right. Or, oh, there's a bump over here, let's hit that. And I clean it up until it fits to me. And there's no machine in the world that can make that, because it's my hand and my shape. It's one of a kind on one tool, and it took me 5-6 minutes. And that's the big difference between power tools and hand tools to me, is that I can make something that fits me personally, as opposed to something that was pumped out of a machine to try and fit everyone. So, tools. The only other thing is that there are lots of tools out there. This is the Stanley 55, the king of hand planes. This thing is designed to replace 55 molding planes in the shop. It is a monstrous beast, and this is the type of thing where if you are a power tool woodworker, there's absolutely no need for you to go out and buy this. However, every one of us wants one of these hanging on the wall because it just looks so cool. There are lots and lots of tools out there that are one-trick ponies. They're designed to do one thing and do it really, really well, or they're overly complicated to try and do multiple things. Those are not the tools you want when you're working in power tools. You want the basic simple things. The chisel, the hand plane, the block plane, a file and rasp, the basic simple tools can add so much to power tools. Whereas these complicated things, I'm still spending a lot of time setting this up. I might as well go grab a router and set it up. This won't save me any time. It really won't give me that much more fun. Why would I want to pull out one of these? Well, because it's kind of cool. But yeah, that's
Very expensive.
oh yeah. This one with a full set of irons. If you get with the original box, eBay, you're looking at $1,000. MWTCA, you're probably looking at like $600. So yeah, they're expensive. And there's a lot of hand tools out there that are very expensive. If you ever come across a hand plane that looks like a bench plane, but it's 6 inches long, it's worth over $1,000. Number one. Number one. Yeah, it's a worthless plane, but it looks so good. So with hand tools and power tools, the big thing is, do you make it to fit a human, or do you make it to fit a machine? And you add a little bit of hand tools and your power tool work, and you can make something that's very unique that fits you personally. So I think that's all I have. What's that?
Something about the spoke shave.
I was going to mention the spoke shave earlier. The spoke shave, if ever I have a kid in the shop, this is the tool you bring out. The spoke shave is just, oh my, that's right, I cranked the sucker down, didn't I? There we go. The spoke shave, grab a little bit of pine, allows you to make curls quickly and easily. And with a flat bottom on here, once it's set up, any monkey, go with the grain, can come in and just have a lot of fun. And I'll give this to the kids because this takes almost no skill at all to make curls. And you get that organic shape. And I can come in here and hit this spot, and then I can feather it out and go all the way along it. And spoke shaves are just a lot of fun. And they can do a lot of what rasps and files do. But the nice thing is, once they're set up, they're kind of like a power tool in that anyone can use them.
Question for you. When you sharpen tools with either a hand machine or a big one like a Tormek, normally they'll give you an option in terms of angles. 20 degrees. In your setup, do you work with one angle?
No, with hand tools, I'm going to be going at whatever angle. For my planes, it's usually 35 degrees-ish. I might go up to 37, it might be down to 30. It's whatever my hand feels like at that moment. And usually I'm going to be feeling the bevel from the last time I did it. For bench chisels, it's around 30. For carving chisels, it's around 20. The lower the angle, the easier it cuts, but the duller, it gets duller faster. The higher the angle, the longer the edge lasts, but the harder it is to push into the work. And so you're always playing that with what durability do you need. Any other questions?
I was wondering why your bench has got the 3 laminations there and they're all different lengths for the bottom of the foot.
Because we were planning on cutting off a little bit shorter, but then my wife said, no, I like it this height, so we never cut them off shorter.
I mean,
Yeah.
exactly the epitome of hand tool work.
I measured my wife and I said, you're going to want a bench this high, so we cut them all to be that length. And the plan was to cut them all off afterwards. But then she had it that length and said, you know, I like it this length, so we left it there. Cool. Well, if any of you want to come up and take a look at these, have some fun.
Thank you very much. Thank you.